this week's Quarantine Coffee Hour. Sorry, folks, if we are a little late. I think we ran into some technical difficulties. But here we are. Still figuring out Quarantine Coffee Hour as we all are in the museum world. So, thanks for joining us again. I'm Derek Pratt, the educator at the Erie Canal Museum. I see we've got at least one person watching, so good. We're live now. So today we will be enjoying the topic of why the Erie Canal was constructed. All right, some people are joining. Thanks for hopping on, folks. Be sure in the comments to say hello and give us a like. Also, you should try to share this on your feeds. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is go in there and press the share button. I'm going to do it right now. All right? Sharing it to my own page. Oops. Nope. Just trying to post it as the Erie Canal Museum. Oh well, whatever. Share it yourselves. I can't. Today, like I said, Derek Pratt, educator at the Erie Canal Museum, we're going to be talking about why we built the Erie Canal. And as always, I am continuing to support local businesses, drinking my cup of coffee, made by Recess Coffee. Good morning, Maya. And as you can see, got another lovely local company. Hi, Steph. The FX Mats Brewing Company, everyone's favorite anthropomorphic beer steins, Schultz and Dooley, right out of Utica. And since it's a bit of a philosophical episode today, why was the Erie Canal built? Was it to be or not to be? On the other side of the mug, we got here, to beer or not to beer. Anyway, so be sure to buy your local products during this time. Keep them open. Anyway, on to the talk, right? To be or not to be the Erie Canal? That is the question. We're following along with a great article written by our curator, Ashley Moretti. You can find it in the, depending on what you're, I don't know why I keep pointing, somewhere is the article link. It's in the description, wherever that is on what you're watching. So, here we go. The reason for building the Erie Canal. Now, the building of the canal was never a particularly, it's a very old idea, building the Erie Canal. First, really, hello Lynn, how's it going today? Anyway, the idea for building the Erie Canal is not a new idea. It wasn't when they were building it in 1817 when they start. In fact, the first calls for improvements to the waterways of New York State occur almost 100 years before it ends up being completed. In 1724, a guy named Cadwallader Colden he goes on an expedition on behalf of the British colonial government to survey and check out the western parts of this relatively new colony. To check it out, this is the old colony of New York, which kings of England love to just say, I now own all of America from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific, because imperialism, that's how that works. Anyway, Cadwallader Colden makes it to about Lake Michigan, but he comes back to the settled parts of the New York colony, writes up a report that he sends to the colonial governor recommending that they improve the natural waterways of New York. There's a lot of reasons for he recognizes that there's a lot of possibilities there, but he also recognizes that if they don't, the French will take over pretty much the whole Great Lakes basin, and they'll be kind of in charge of the middle of the country if the British don't do something first. And if there's one thing the British hate, it's the French. Feelings are mutual. And it turns out Cadwallader Colden is spot on in his prediction. The French really take over most of the Great Lakes area and the Ohio River Valley. But luckily for England, I guess, thanks to the 7 Years' War, like Britain wins a couple battles in India and Prussia beats the Austrians in a few places, and bada bing, bada boom, the British now own Canada. So that's how imperialism works. Yet again. They still don't listen to Cadwallader Colden at that point, even though he's proven correct. So anyway, that's the first thought about canals, and really recommendations for improvements. Now, the article that hopefully you're following along on then goes on to talk about Washington. He is a very big proponent of what at the time are called internal improvements. So that's the building of roads and canals, really, to improve the transportation network. He actually, in the early part of 1783, he is stationed up in on the Hudson River in Newburgh, New York. After the British surrender at Yorktown, the only place that the British are left in the Revolution is in New York City, so he takes the Continental Army up to the Hudson River Valley to make sure the British are stuck in New York until a peace treaty can be arranged and they leave. So while he's there, it's pretty boring gig, kind of. He does a lot of stuff that ensures we have democracy and everything while there, so that's neat. But while he's there, he he's still a little bored, so he goes on a bit of a tour of upstate New York and checks out all of its waterways, and he finds that they are really awesome. He actually writes a letter to Thomas Jefferson talking about that, saying, like, we really need to get to work on digging canals and stuff, because if we don't, the state of New York's going to, and they will surpass us as the foremost state in the Union. And on that note, Washington himself gets to work on building canals. He is one of the chief financiers of this thing called the Potomac Company, which works on improving the Potomac River down on the Maryland-Virginia border. It really doesn't make full-blown canals like we're going to see when they build the Erie Canal. They build small canals around rapids and waterfalls. They clear debris out of the river, and it's really kind of not all that successful. And similarly, there's another company, much like the one Washington creates, constructed on the Mohawk River. It's called the Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company. Western Inland does the same thing, tries to dig small canals. Notably, they build a canal between where the Mohawk River turns north at Rome and this little creek called Wood Creek. They build some locks, Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company is actually one of its chief financiers, and the guy who's really kind of in charge of it is a guy some of you might be familiar with, Philip Schuyler, the father-in-law of Alexander Hamilton. So anyone who likes Hamilton and recognizes Philip Schuyler from that, please give us a like. But anyway, Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company is a bit of a failure. Doesn't work out too well. The technology is really not there, nor is the financing. Private individuals just cannot do it. They discovered they don't have the money for it. They actually take out loans from the state. State buys a lot of the stock in these corporations. Still, not enough. And the Mohawk is a wild river, so all the improvements kind of get destroyed. Additionally, we often call the Erie Canal the birthplace of American civil engineering, because there are no trained engineers in the country at the time, at least American-born ones. The Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company, there's a lot of guys trying to figure out how to make locks and canals all by themselves. Philip Schuyler oversees the building of a few locks himself, and their other option is to hire engineers from outside the country to try to help them out. So they do hire this guy, William Weston, who his skill as an engineer is debatable. Most of the projects he runs are failures, but it's not all his fault. All these projects are underfunded, and technology in the United States of America at the time is not particularly good. So, they make some strides, and there's a guy like William Weston has several apprentices who work with him. Not exactly apprentices, but there's several guys who work with him that help him out, and they get a lot of valuable training. Notably, there's Benjamin Wright, who he does a ton on the future canal. He's going to be in charge of the engineering on the Erie Canal, and he does a lot of stuff before that too. He surveys the route, and we're going to talk more about Benjamin Wright coming up, fear not. So now we're going to get on to, we already are on the second paragraph of this this article. Now, we talked a little about funding, but that's going to become a really big issue. Who is going to pay for these canals? There's a lot of enthusiasm about them, especially, where am I? Especially in 1807, when the Secretary of the Treasury, a fascinating guy named Albert Gallatin, he's a Swiss immigrant who ends up serving as Secretary of Treasury for both the Jefferson and Madison administrations. He writes up a report about roads and canals in America, and suggests this broad, sweeping reform to build roads and canals across the country, make a national plan, and have it federally funded, which is a big deal, kind of. Because they've realized these private corporations are not working. So Gallatin suggests that. By the way, another fun Hamilton reference, if you go to the Department of the Treasury now in Washington, at the front is a statue of Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, and then the backside of the building is a statue of Albert Gallatin to honor his great work. Anywho, this Gallatin plan It excites the country. In 1807, at the same time, in upstate New York, one of the routes Gallatin has proposed in his big plan is one that goes from Hudson River to Lake Ontario, and then another canal around Niagara Falls connecting Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And people in upstate New York are super excited about this. They think it's going to be great for the country, their territory, and they create this fusion party. It's called the Canal Ticket. It's led by Joshua Foreman, often considered the founder of Syracuse, New York. They go to Albany, suggest building a canal. The act is actually first proposed by Foreman, and it is seconded by our old friend Benjamin Wright. See, told you we'd get back to him. Joshua Foreman and another team of New Yorkers head down to Washington to then ask for federal funding, because, like Gallatin wrote this report, seems like the federal government will want to pay for it. Well, they end up talking to old Thomas Jefferson. And if you're reading the article, you skip ahead a little, you can see how he responded to them in 1809. He said that the prospect of building a canal through New York was, quote, little short of madness. He also tells them that it would take over a century to actually build this canal, and he points to the failure of Washington's Potomac Canal as an example of how these internal improvement projects, especially one as ambitious as the Erie Canal, wouldn't work. Now, I just mentioned the Erie Canal. You can also see in the article that there was a big question about what route it should take. Gallatin proposed this route to Lake Ontario, but that gets stopped largely because of Canada. There's a lot of issues there. If they did the original proposal of Gallatin's, where they go to Lake Ontario and another around Lake Erie, the boats that are coming from the other four Great Lakes, once they get to Lake Erie, they might as well, once they get to Lake Ontario, they might as well just go to Montreal rather than down to New York City. Because you've got to switch boats a few times, because canal boats cannot travel on the Great Lakes, and then you can't travel on rivers and stuff. So it's a whole thing. So it would economically not make sense. And also, remember, this is 1807, 09. America, in general, was not getting along too well with Canada and the people who owned Canada, the British. That's all going to come to a head in 1812. Anyone know the name of that war? Of course you do. It's the War of 1812. Tell us your favorite War of 1812 facts in the comments. There you go. You now have an opportunity to share your War of 1812 knowledge. I'm sure you've been waiting for this day for years. Anywho, War of 1812 happened, and that really shows the country why we need to construct an Erie Canal, or a canal, and improve our transportation network, especially in upstate New York. And New York is a major battleground in the War of 1812, and it does not go particularly well for the Americans. It also doesn't go great for the British at points, but it doesn't go well for the Americans for a lot of reasons, and most of those are due to the incredibly poor ability of the American army to supply itself and to communicate with itself. Transporting a cannon, as we're going to see soon, was not an easy prospect in 1812, 1813 through upstate New York. Virtually impossible, actually. So this brings us to why we need a canal. As I just mentioned, overland travel, traveling inland, was virtually, not virtually impossible, but it was incredibly difficult. And the transportation network of America at the time, and upstate New York in particular, was super outdated. You had roads, which started out as Indian trails, paths that had been taken for centuries. The route that the Erie Canal is eventually going to take has been taken for millennia. It's mostly the Mohawk River Valley. You go up the Mohawk, you go west on that, and then you can get to the relatively decent plains of the around here, central New York. You've got Oneida Lake and everything. There's a lot of waterways. So there's these trails that they're very rudimentary at first, and not even at first, forever. Eventually, there's enough settlers in the western and central part of the state, people try making roads. They're still kind of horrible affairs. I've seen several accounts. There are these like 2-foot tall stumps sticking out of the road that you have to still navigate around because no one wants to take the time to pull out stumps. One of the first of these is the Seneca Turnpike, which many of us here in central New York are no doubt aware of. Seneca Turnpike's one of the first roads west of Utica. And there's also the Cherry Valley Turnpike. There's the Genesee Turnpike, which gets built a little later. That's meant to get directly to the salt fields in Syracuse. These eventually they put down logs in the roads to try to make them. They sort of bury the logs. They're not just dropping logs in the middle of the road. That's detrimental. No, they sort of make a pretty much wooden path. These are called corduroy roads, because if you know corduroy, it's pretty bumpy. Anyway, so there's that option, and these corduroy roads are terrible. I mentioned in the article how in the springtime, if you know upstate New York weather, spring it gets muddy because of all the snow. So people get bogged down in the springtime, also summer and winter. If it rains, you're going to get stuck in the mud, while also in the summer or the drier periods, you're going to get choked with dust when you're using these. Plus, again, there's these stumps and everything. And if you come to a body of water, there are not bridges or anything to cross over, so that's a bit difficult to navigate. You either got to hire a ferry or you've got to find a way to ford the river or cross it. If you've ever played the Oregon Trail, you know how difficult it is to cross a river. Please like if you enjoy the Erie Canal. Steph, I know you're watching. You better like that. So, anywho, there's your road option. They're not the most popular choice, because in case you couldn't tell, they're kind of terrible. So, your other option is to travel by water, and this was the much more popular option in the early 1800s, but it was not without challenges. What you would mostly use is a thing called a Durham boat. That's a flat, relatively flat bottom boat. It's got a low draft that you can take. It has a sail, which you can use when you're traveling downriver, or if you get onto a river like Hudson, which is pretty calm, or if you get out on Oneida Lake. These boats travel really well downstream. They move pretty quick. But when you're going upstream, especially on a river like the Mohawk, which is notoriously has a very strong current, you have to push it. The whole crew has these big poles, and they have to push it all the way up the river. And they've got to do that the whole way, for the most part. The only exception to that, when you're not pushing your boat with your poles, is when you reach an obstacle in the river, like a waterfall. And there's a lot on the Mohawk. There's notable ones at Cohoes, German Flats, and Little Falls. For those obstacles, you have to remove your boat from the water, along with all the goods that are being carried on the Durham boat. Another big advantage of a Durham boat versus taking a road. On a road, you can take a wagon, which can carry 1 to 2 tons of goods. Durham boat, 10 to 20 tons. But when you get to these obstacles, like waterfalls, you have to then take those tons of goods and your boat out of the water and carry them around the obstacle. Also, remember how waterfalls work. That means that there's a hill there, so you have to carry your boat uphill or downhill. If you're coming back, you, again, can't take your boat over a waterfall. So that's a really big challenge. Once you get up the Mohawk River, too, you run into another challenge. You get to Rome, New York, around there, and you can't go much farther on the Mohawk River. You could, but you'd just be going north into the Adirondacks, which there's no point to really go into the Adirondacks. So you have to then take your boat out and transport it a full mile all the way to this little stream called Wood Creek. This transport is called the Great Portage. That's why Fort Stanwix is where it is. It's to protect this vital choke point in the whole system. But anyway, you get to Wood Creek, and Wood Creek is a really weird stream. Sometimes it's there. Other times you really can't find Wood Stream. It's a little more Wood Creek. It's a little more than a drizzle down through its creek bed, which makes it pretty difficult to float a boat down. So Wood Creek's a tough one to navigate. If the creek isn't flowing, you're probably going to have to carry your boat even farther, and eventually, though, you'll get to Oneida Lake. And they've actually discovered a Durham boat at the bottom of Oneida Lake just recently. It's fascinating. It's the first ever Durham boat that has been discovered. Before, a lot of what we thought about Durham boats was we got from looking at pictures of Durham boats, and we were like, here's how they were constructed. But now they finally found a Durham boat in Oneida Lake, so that's really cool. They've done archaeology on it. Very fascinating stuff. But anyway, once you get into Oneida Lake, you can then take it across the lake, get to the Oneida River, and from there you can get to the Oswego River, you can get to the Seneca River, you can get into Onondaga Lake, and that'll take you right to those sweet, sweet salt fields in what was then Salt Point, became Salina, became Syracuse. So that's... And then you get to go all the way back. Carry your boat another mile from Wood Creek to Rome. Then you got to carry it around all the falls again. Then you get to the Hudson River. So from what I just said, you can tell that is still an arduous and long journey. And that really comes to a head in the War of 1812, as I said. Because trying to move an army like that is not impossible, but it's pretty close. It's really, really tough. So that's what it's like moving around there. Also, the people in America who are thinking about constructing an Erie Canal, they recognize that, what am I saying? They recognize the usefulness of canals. Canal mania had taken off. That's what they called it at the time. All over Europe, famous ones connecting Manchester to the coal fields out in and around Wales in in Great Britain. There's the Canal du Midi in France that connects. Well, it was the Canal Royal at the time. It was that until they cut off the king's head, and you don't want your royal canal anymore. Now it's the Canal du Midi, connects the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean, and that really shows people that the Canal du Midi is a engineering marvel at the time. Really, a lot of these canals are, but that's almost as long as the Erie Canal is going to be. So it shows that these length of canals are doable and feasible. And a lot of the engineers that are going to work on the Erie Canal, they study a lot of these European canals. I've been saying we're going to have one of these about canvas white sometime. I'm getting there. Fear not. Phil, I believe, you asked for a canvas white episode. So anyway, but really, what is the advantage of a canal? We've talked a lot about the movements behind building a canal, but really, ultimately, why do people even care if they have a canal? What difference is that going to make? Well, there are tons of advantages to the canal, and its biggest is that it is flat and calm, very much unlike a river. So in case you weren't listening to me earlier, I see we've got some new people joining. The Mohawk River is a really wild and unpredictable stream, as is Wood Creek, as we talked about, for very different reasons. A canal, you know exactly what you're getting. It's going to be nice, flat. There aren't waterfalls that you have to carry your boat around. That's why they build locks to deal with elevation changes. Very flat. Your boat can just move gently along the water at a steady pace. You know how long it's going to take. There aren't going to be surprises. Hopefully, if there are, you're in a bit of trouble, but not as much as if you get surprised by a waterfall. You know, you're on a 4-foot deep canal. Can't run into that big of a problem. Where was I? Yeah, so you've got these nice flat, calm canals, and as a result, because you don't have to pull your boat out of the water and everything, you can build a way bigger boat than a Durham boat. Remember, I said a Durham boat can carry 10 to 20 tons? A canal boat on the original Clinton's Ditch Canal, 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep, they can carry between 40 and 60 tons of goods. Now imagine if you were on a river trying to move that and then having to pull out your boat. For one, you're not even going to be able to move the boat that's required to carry that much goods. But then you also have to carry 40 to 60 tons around a waterfall. Pretty much impossible. So you can carry way more stuff than on a Durham boat, or, like I said, a cart can carry 1 to 2 tons max, really. So you're carrying a lot more. And also, remember I talked about how backbreaking the work was moving a Durham boat. It's also pretty tough moving a cart. When that thing gets stuck in the mud of those roads that we talked about, your horse can only do so much. You're getting out, pushing the cart and everything. It's tough. A lot of manpower is required. On a canal boat, you do not need to have humans working it. And also you have to pay humans when you're on a Durham boat and whatnot. Unlike them, got mules, or originally horses were pulling your boats, which works a lot better. And it's a lot easier for everyone involved. A captain of a boat now no longer has to push his boat upstream. He just has to tie a rope and some other stuff to a horse, and it'll pull him at 4 miles an hour, which is about how fast, if not even faster, than he was already moving on the Mohawk River. So that's pretty handy. And the the results of this show themselves immediately when they finally do get the canal built in 1825. The cost of shipping from Buffalo to New York City, they're cut by they're about a tenth of what they were before the building of the canal. And also the time it takes is very much reduced. It takes almost a month to travel across the state before the Erie Canal is built. With the canal, it takes about a week. So the amounts you can carry and the speed you can travel at make it so shipping costs just decrease enormously. They pretty much disappear. Well, not disappear. That's false. But compared to what they were, they're infinitely lower. Again, not infinitely. But they're a lot lower. And as a result, trade booms in the state of New York. I think I mentioned this in a previous Quarantine Coffee Hour. The term boomtown is actually coined to refer to Rochester, which explodes in population. Similarly, Buffalo, Utica, Syracuse all become major cities very quickly after the opening of the canal. And it's not just New York. Now the entire Midwest along Great Lakes has access to an eastern port using, again, a much easier mode of transportation than they previously had, which was the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Rivers, again, are tougher to use than canals to move goods a lot of the time. So there's big explosions in population all along the Great Lakes. Cleveland, Ohio becomes a major port that's shipping tons of these goods right up Lake Erie to Buffalo. This is actually a fun little fact for you folks. Another Ohio-related one, but it is also related to the Erie Canal. You see, Ohio was booming thanks to the Erie Canal. They also started building their own canals. Pretty much every state, after seeing the success of the Erie Canal, wants their own canal. Doesn't work out as well for them. These little things called railroads are starting to be invented, so by the time a lot of these states build their canals, they're already out of date because railroads exist. But anyway, Ohio's really enthusiastic about all the great things that are happening because of these canals. They actually decide to build two. There's the one that goes to Cleveland, and then they build another one in the western part of the state that's going to have its terminus in Toledo. But Toledo's on the border of Ohio and Michigan, which is a bit complicated. No one fully knows where. Well, Toledo makes the most sense to at least put this terminus. So Ohio wants it. They think Toledo is going to become the next great boomtown of the canal mania that's sweeping. Michigan also wants it because they're like, hey, we want this future major city. So a little thing happens in 1834, 1835-ish. It's called the Toledo War, where the militias of the Michigan Territory and the state of Ohio kind of face off. Not a lot happens there, but they're on the verge when a peace treaty is decided. Ohio gets this little strip that goes into Michigan. If you look at a map, you can see it. There's this little weird bump on the northwestern side of Ohio, southeastern corner of Michigan. And in exchange for giving up the big city of Toledo, or future big city of Toledo, Michigan gets the Upper Peninsula. So there you go. Well, welcome to the new episode of Why the States Got Their Shapes. I'm your host, Derek Pratt. So that's a fun little effect of the Erie Canal that people don't often think about. But we're a bit off topic here. The point was, Erie Canal, why they constructed it was they knew they were going to build tons of new markets in the West, like Cleveland and Toledo. And everyone's really enthusiastic about these canals. The article says, quote, "The prevailing attitude among Americans of the 19th century was that their creator had provided the tools, setting, and intelligence necessary to undertake such a project, so why not do it?" We haven't really gotten into much of the other reasons why people wanted to build the canal. There's this huge sense of nationalism after the War of 1812. It's called the era of great feelings, of good feelings, not great feelings, where everyone's like, we sort of won this. We didn't lose the War of 1812. We tied. So they're super excited about that. They stood up to England, the world superpower. We ignored the fact that they were kind of dealing with Napoleon at the time. Beside the point. America's super excited about this, so they're like, let's do... If we can beat the British, we can do anything. So, like, we can build a canal. We can take over the whole continent, essentially. This is kind of the beginning of this whole manifest destiny idea, and there's a lot of what's called American exceptionalism, where we think we're the great experiment in democracy, and the city on a hill. Everyone will look to us to do things. So the American people and the people of New York really wanted to show off what a democratic republic can do, including build these great infrastructure projects. And they think it's God's will and it's their destiny. Though also interestingly, there is a debate at the time along those same lines. People are, while some people think or the Creator has given us the abilities to transform the landscape, other people are saying, well, no, God wanted Americans stuck on the East Coast for a reason, and like we shouldn't be messing with nature. They lose that fight, as you can't tell, if you can't tell. And I'm not gonna try to judge what God wanted us to do with the land. Just telling you an interesting debate that happened there. So that kind of concludes the talk. Thanks for joining us. Encourage you to come back next week. We're going to do this a little different. We're going to have a guest speaker, Jeff Ludwig of the Seward House. We're going to talk about William Seward and his relation to internal improvements. Be sure to check for the article written by Jeff that's dropping on Monday. Follow Erie Canal Museum on Facebook. Also on Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central, we will be having a virtual happy hour, which I talked about at the beginning of this broadcast, with the Museum of South Texas History. So, hope to see you then. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone.